Okay, I'm going to take my mask off. Okay, so what we did yesterday, and I'm just going to repeat what I just said to you guys, is recorded, and part one is on our main website, so you can see part one of this, and I'll have part two up there today. And what we did was we made a sample final project with several classes, okay? Some of those classes you saw yesterday, we got right off of my website, like the dialogues, numbers, and text. So they didn't require a lot of work. Those were things that from the help page of our site have been available since the classes unit, and even before that, there were versions of these this code available to help you guys through the various programming problems throughout the course. As well, the person class came directly from one of the examples we did in the classes unit in the big example that we've been working on, which is also available on my website, by the way. You can get that class and all the code for it. What we actually created was a class called user. We created a class called globals. Okay, this class came with the project when we created it. And the one we spent the most time on was the login user interface, which we use the designer to build. Okay, so I'm going to open that one first. That's the one that's been the most important here. We actually use the NetBeans designer to build the user interface. And yesterday we added code into it. Okay, so that's where we're at. Okay, now a couple other classes that were important. The user class, which we wrote. The user class, the globals class, so let me make these bigger. The user class uses inheritance. It uses encapsulation. Those are important things as part of the 30S course, and they're part of the mastery as well. And a constructor and some other stuff. The globals class actually uses a thing called static, which goes a little beyond the 30S course. That's a concept from the 40S course. So even a potential extra mastery point there, just as a sort of a backup. Okay, so here's what I want to do today. I want to go back to the login UI class, go back to the code for creating an account, which we have this code in here, where we check the name, we check the password, and then we make a user, add them to the array, and then add them to the list box. But I'm going to slip some code in. I'm going to make sure the password is only numbers. I know that's not always the way a password can work, but that's just going to help us use some more code and some more sort of logic here. In this program, I'm going to ensure that the password is only numerical. Now, you don't have to do that as part of your project, but I'm just going to add that in there. And to use that, I'm going to use one of the classes that we brought in from my website. Now, just a reminder about that. That was from the help page of the Computer Science 30S page down at the bottom. And we were getting it from the classes unit. But if you go all the way back to the methods unit, before you even knew what classes were, and you were to look at some of that code, we were already at that point when we were, for example, inputting an integer, double checking to make sure that that was kind of a number, right? Like at least we weren't letting it be a blank. We were kind of converting it to a number. Then when we got back to the unit called arrays, and we were checking to see if it was a number, inputting the integer, we were using a little is it an integer method. So let's just take a quick look at that one, where we can actually loop through every single character in a string and see, is it a digit, is it not a digit? So as the units progressed, we kind of dealt with this ability to error check at a whole other level. So now using this class called numbers, I can look over all the little methods that are available in numbers, right? In this class called numbers, and you can see the one called is it an integer is right in there. And because I used Java documentation when I wrote this thing, you can actually read, it checks to see if the value contains numerical characters. So it's going to determine that. So I'm going to use that in login UI. Okay? If numbers dot is an integer, password equals false, meaning it is not an integer. Okay? So this is, again, me using code that's already available to you. And it's just various code that we discussed in class, just formatted for you and available for your use. And then what I can do is basically put out a dialog, just like I did up here. Put out an output saying password must be numbers only. So I'm going to just tell the user that. Oops. And then, like I did above, I'm going to return so I get out of this method, so I don't have to go any further in the code. So let's see if that now is one other level of error checking on this final project. When we started this course, I said you didn't have to worry too much about error checking. When we were just doing system.out and dialogues, you could have assumed the user was going to type everything in properly. But as we progressed a little further along, now we're going to get a little deeper into this. So they can put in whatever name they want. But if they try a password that uses letters, the password must be numbers only. Or if it's letters with numbers or characters, stuff like that, it can be numbers only. If it is just numbers, then it registers them as a user. And again, that may not be something you want in your project, but there it is. Okay, we're going to add one other thing here to login UI. Well, a couple other things to login UI. This time we're going to go up here where we were already putting code in the constructor of login UI, where we set visible true. We're going to add another couple little lines here. This dot set resizable false, and this dot set location relative to null. You might remember these two lines from last week during remote learning in the extras unit. It was just some stuff you can do with a J-frame. So now I'll just show you. First I'll show you without these two lines. So remove those two lines, run it again. So you can see it starts up here in the corner, and I have this button where I can maximize this thing I've built. Okay, now I'm going to put those two lines back in and rerun it. And you can see the maximize button has been disabled, not to mention I can't go to the edge and resize it. And it's starting right in the center of the screen. So just some minor sort of visual details there. All right, now we're going to jump over to delete account. The button to do deleting the account. Okay, so I went out to the design, clicked J button 2, and let's delete the account. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is delete it from the list box. Okay, list1 dot delete. But how are we going to delete this, right? Like, are we going to delete this? In what way are we going to delete this? Well, what I would assume is it's the one that is selected in the list box. Delete the account that's selected. So what can we do in list 1 to get the selected, notice that built into these visual things are built-in methods to help with this. Now, one of them gets the index of the selected item. One of them gets the actual item in the list box. So if I had 10 things in the list box and I clicked on the word cat, it would give me the word cat. But get selected index would give me where in the list box, like is it at spot 4, spot 3, spot 0, etc. So what I'm going to do is use int index equals list1 dot get selected index. Okay, so it's going to get the index from the list box. Now, interestingly enough, if they don't select anything, it actually tells you in the documentation that what it will return is a -1 if they don't select anything. So let's check for that. If index equals -1, that means they didn't select something. So let's tell them that. Let's use our good old dialogues.output to do that. Copy paste. Please select a user. And then I'll just return. I'll get out of here. Okay? So that's if it's a -1. I can actually try that right now without selecting anything. If I click delete account, it says please select a user. Okay? But if I can make it through that error check, now what I need to do is go to list1 dot remove, and sure enough, there's a remove method that stores the position, and that's exactly what I need. Remove that index. Now that removes it from the list box, but what about the array? How do I remove something from an array? Well, you can't, believe it or not. You cannot technically remove a spot from an array without rebuilding the entire array. So it's possible to do it, but it's a lot of work. So instead, you guys are going to love this. Instead, we will use a technique, you're going to love the name of this, called lazy deletion. This is built for teenagers. Lazy deletion. What lazy deletion is going to do is it's going to go into globals, which I cannot spell. Come on. Globals dot users at spot index. And it's not going to delete it. It's just going to set it to nothing. Okay? Now, remember, globals has an array of users. So what am I can't just set it to that. I'm going to set it to null. Null indicates that it's been deleted there. It's wiped out. Okay? So it's a bit of a cheat right there, where I'm actually just setting that spot to be a null in the array. Now, for 40S students, the data structure they use is able to delete things dynamically. So that's just a sales pitch for the 40S course, where you learn about this structure called a linked list, which can add and remove and stuff like that. But the array doesn't allow that. Okay, so let's just put this to the test. Let's see if this deletion process is working. So if I put in walks, the password, create the account, okay, I'm going to put in cat with a different number, create the account, and put in dog, the different number, create the account. I'm going to select cat and delete that account, and there it's gone. Okay, and select dog, delete the account. Select walks, delete the account. So it's working. It's working the way we expect it to. In actually testing this, I found something else that I'm just going to add quickly to our program, and that's I'm going to add this to the other button. I'm going to clear out the text boxes, because once I add an account, I found that was annoying that I had to go and do that myself. So j text field 1 dot set text to be nothing. And JText field 2. Real easy code. And just to show you now how that works, I'm also going to do another line here, JText field 1 dot request focus. And I'll just show you what that does. That's easier to demonstrate what that does. So walks, 1, 2, 3, create account. Request focus means the flashing cursor goes back to that spot. So I'm ready to do it again. Okay, it's just a nice little feature there. All right. The last button to build for this 30S sample project is the login button. Double-clicking login, this is the final button to add code to. What to do when we log in. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check that the user, or well, actually what I'm going to do is get the name and password from dialogues. So let's do that first. So string name equals dialogues dot. Now here I can use other methods built in to this thing, right? Including input, which is just a way to get input. Please enter user name. And I'll do the exact same thing for password. So their name and their password. So I'm just going to show you what that button looks like. So I click login. Please enter username. Please enter password. So just the way you would expect them. Now, once I have those names and passwords from dialogues, I'm going to check if this user is in the database, which means the array. I'm going to search the array to see if this user's in there. Okay? If they're not, then we're done. Okay? So I'm going to build a user. User equals new user with the name and password. So there's the user. Okay? And now I'm going to use a custom method. So if is in database, this user equals true. So that's not a method we have yet, but I'm going to create a method because creating methods is another mastery factor. If they're in the database, then that would be a place where I could just say, at this point, I would move on, right? So log in successful. Okay? Else, okay, I would say, user not in database. So I can display one of those two things, whether they log in successfully or not. Now, potentially, the code could move on to other parts of a final project right here. So at this point in the code, if you had other parts of your final project other than this little login, this would be the spot where you would add it in. Like now you could jump over to some other part of your project after the login. Okay? So I'm going to write this last method and then we'll be done with this 30S sample project. Create method is in database. Jumping to that method. Let's start with the comment first. Is in database. This checks if the past user, the one I passed to this method, is in the array of all users who have registered or not. The user to check, and it returns they are in the database, which means true, or they aren't, which means false. So that's my to-do for this method, okay? All right, so how am I going to check this? How am I going to check this user to see if they're in the database of globals, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through the array. We know how to loop through arrays. We use for loops. Globals dot users dot length. It's the same for loop we've done to loop through arrays before. Okay? We're going to pull out a user from the array. So user, okay, I can't say user again because I already have that name as the parameter. User, user in array, oops, equals globals dot users bracket I. Okay, but we don't want all the null spots. So if the user in the array is not equal to null, why do I add that little if statement in there? I want to skip over empty array spots. This would include the ones I use lazy deletion on, where I deleted them by making them null. Okay? So I'm going to skip those spots, the ones that like aren't there. Okay, so now how do I know if the user's in the database? Well, if user dot name dot equals user in database in array dot name. So that's a really kind of big if statement, but it's really checking to see if the user's name equals the users in the array's name. Now you could also do that with temporary variables, but that's the case. But I want to do that and check the password. So I'm going to literally redo that code and just say user.name to user.password. Uh-oh, password I can't get at because it's private. Who knew? So yeah, we could make it public, but instead of that, what I'm going to do, okay, is I'm going to make this a little bit different by putting the method right in the user class. If user dot check user in array, instead of check, I'm going to call them is equal to. So if the user is equal to the user in the array, if that is true, then I return true, that they are in fact the equal person in the array. And then down here, after the loop, so if I make it through the entire database and I never find one that's equal, I'm going to return false. I never found them. Now this gives us one more task to do. We need to create this method over in the other class. Okay? Which we're going to do. All right. Create method. Jump to the method. It actually jumps right to that class. And I'm looking at the time here. I know the time is short. We won't have time to go through the handing in process. I'll have to do that a different day. All right. So is it equal to? It checks the past user with this user. The user to check. And I'm going to rename this just user. Okay. Returns they are the same, true or not, false. Okay, final piece. Is it equal to? So string name1 equals this dot name. String name2 equals this dot, sorry, not this dot name, user dot name. So there's the two names. If name1 dot equals name2, if that is false, if they are not the same name, return false. We're done. We're done at this point. They're not the same names. We don't need to go any further. So in other words, we check the names first. So we check to see if they have the same names. If they don't, they're not equal. Now we're going to check the passwords. So we're going to do something similar. String, password 1 equals this dot password. No problem there. Password 2 equals user dot password. Now we got a problem. Problem again is password theoretically is private, but it's not private when you're in the class, okay? And then I'll just see if password 1 equals password 2. If they're not equal, return false. Okay, let's see if it works. I got a bug. Where's the bug? That's no bug. Sorry, just 1 sec. See return statement. Oh, that's why. Passes the checks. Return true. They are equal. Okay, now let's give it a shot. Walks, password 1, 2, 3. Create account. Dog, password 4, 5, 6. Create account. Let's try to log in with the name Walks and the password 1, 2, 3. Login successful. But let's try to log in with the name Cat and 1, 2, 3. User not in database. Let's try to log in with the word dog, but a different password, 4, 3, 2. User not in database. Let's try to log in with dog and 4, 5, 6. Login successful. And that's it. That's now a sample final project that meets everything I need for a potential final project. In these 2 videos, and it's available on my website or will be shortly. All right, that's it.